Good morning, everyone. Thanks for arriving so early. I hope this talk is worth you getting up at this hour on a Sunday morning. My name is Renwick. I'm also known as MIDI Poet on Reddit and various other social media platforms. I've been part of the Monero community for a few years, and I've slowly becoming more involved as time passes. And today I'm going to talk to you about the philosophy of privacy and attempt to make interconnections between some relatively abstract philosophical concepts and the cryptocurrency and blockchain industry as a whole. While you probably won't learn anything new about either cryptocurrency or blockchain, I'm hoping that you might leave with a deeper understanding of why privacy is important and why I personally believe that the general level of cognitive dissonance surrounding information privacy in the blockchain space is A, extremely disheartening, and B, fundamentally dangerous. Before I do that, I want to say thanks to Mike Tidwell for the gracious invite and the warm reception, and also say thank you to all those involved in the organisation of the event. It's been extremely professional throughout, and the conference content, I'm sure you'll all agree, has been first class thus far. I also hope I don't destroy that in one fell swoop this morning. I also need to say thank you to the Monero community, because my trip here to Atlanta was funded by the Monero Forum funding system. So members of the community have entrusted me to come here and talk on behalf of them, on behalf of privacy in general, and that trust manifests as donations from the community to fund my travel expenses. I'm very grateful for the opportunity and to those that actually donated cryptocurrency on my behalf. I'm going to state quite clearly now that I'm not going to talk about what cryptocurrency is, and nor am I going to talk about any specifics of blockchain technology. I'm going to take a very high level overview of a very important concept: privacy. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what privacy is. I don't have the authority, the intelligence, or the wisdom to do that. We know that privacy is a complex, multifaceted, and multi-layered concept. We know that it is dynamic with respect to time, space, place, context, situation, and person. There is no one-size-fits-all description nor definition, and anybody that tells you as such is probably a charlatan. But you're probably all wondering why I have the authority to speak on the matter, and that's a totally fair question. Aside from having a personal interest in philosophy, being a privacy advocate, and a member of the Monero community for better or worse, I have for the past 12 months been involved in a postgraduate privacy-based information systems research project at University College Cork in Ireland. The project is concerned with gathering and analysing perspectives of privacy from a wide range of agents in the blockchain space. Now, during this time I had to read a lot. And I mean a lot, okay? So if any of you have done postgraduate research, I'm sure you can all relate. It's an absolute pain in the ass. Now, with all that said, where does one start? So in a 30-minute talk, it's difficult to draw out the full range of concepts, terminology, and abstract ideas. And I also appreciate that this crowd has a wide spectrum of opinions, interests, and knowledge levels. I think at this point it's important to remember that the concept of privacy straddles a wide range of fields, so law, economics, politics, sociology, ethnography, information systems, and computer science, to name but a few. At the root of all these fields, in my opinion, is the philosophy of privacy. Now, I'm under no illusion that some of you here listening probably know a vast amount more than me about everything there is to know. Some of you are going to know less. Either way, I'm here to share with you some things that I have learned along the way about privacy. I'm going to talk mainly about three philosophical aspects. So the first is privacy and autonomy. So privacy in its relation to personal freedom, free will, and/or independence. Then I'll talk about privacy and justice. So privacy in its relation to morality and a code of ethics. And then I'll talk about privacy and the individual, so privacy in its relation to personal identity and the sense of self. I want at this stage to point you to three resources that the talk leans heavily on. They're not the only resources, but they certainly underpin the core of this talk. So the first is Adam Moore's Defining Privacy that was published in 2008 in the Journal of Social Philosophy. The second is Jeroen van de Hoven and his article Information Technology, Privacy and the Protection of Personal Data, also published in 2008. And the last is a book, A Buddhist Theory of Privacy, published in 2016 by the author Suraj Hongladharam. There's a link at the end of the slides to these if you're interested, and if not, come talk to me afterwards and I'll share the details. The overarching structure of the talk is as follows, right? First, I'm going to outline why the privacy conversation is important. I'm then going to detail the high-level philosophical privacy frames. I'm then going to discuss some of the core ideas within these frames, and then attempt to draw interrelations with the wider blockchain industry. When we attempt to understand the practical way in which society involves themselves with notions of privacy, there are three main perspectives that are found. Now, the perspectives aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and nor is this an exhaustive list. It's literally just the three main ones that are found. So the first is this idea of privacy apathy. So this is the view that there is so much information flowing around our environment, whether digital, physical, or even abstract, that there isn't any point trying to protect ourselves anymore. So any attempt is in vain, given the power, scope, and depth of data harvesting, gathering, and analysis tools and techniques. The second is that privacy is antithetical to societal good. So these are ideas that equate privacy to control, power, and secrecy. So the veil of privacy affords levels of criminality. Nefarious agents operate in private, protected spaces afforded by evil technologies such as cryptography, otherwise known as mathematics. And the last is that society needs privacy protection. So the onslaught of corporations, secondary data markets, manipulative agents, and government surveillance ensures that there is a need for privacy legislation, regulation, and privacy protection. The perspectives are worth noting because any way you look at it, educating people on the supposed meanings of privacy should ensure that personal ideologies and perspectives are better reasoned. If one is apathetic, perhaps philosophy can give someone more hope or drive in the privacy battle. If one believes that privacy is harmful, perhaps one might be educated as to the benefits of privacy for things such as self-determination, individualization, or social and community cohesion. If one believes that privacy protection is needed, for example like the GDPR, understanding philosophies may help better enactment of protection through regulation, legislation, and the development of systems and frameworks to support that protection. Any way you look at it, the conversation is important. Detailing what privacy may or may not mean, what it may or may not afford, why it should or should not be protected to the nth degree are important conversations to have regardless of your own individual stance on privacy. Now remember, I'm not here to tell you all individually what is right or what is wrong. I'm here to transfer knowledge, help you reach your own conclusions on what may be right or wrong for yourself, your family, your own context, and your own situation. All I'm really trying to do is support us coming to some societal consensus on what I call the cruciality of privacy. Let's get to grip with some overarching principles. So, privacy on the whole may be explained in either descriptive or normative terms. So, descriptive describes a condition or state of something. For example, the idea of private property. This house is private property, this land is private property, this information is private. The term describes an actual conditional state of something. Privacy can also be described in the form of moral obligations or a code of ethics. So that will be the normative view of privacy. So this may manifest as a moral claim for others to refrain from certain activities. So for example, please respect my privacy or don't invade their privacy. There are also reductionist and non-reductionist accounts of privacy. So reductionists believe that privacy is reducible to other concepts such as the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to freedom, moral justice, and so on. Non-reductionists believe that privacy is not reducible and is a concept in its own right and can be described on its own terms. it's important to introduce a third account of privacy, and that is the control and use account. This states that a privacy right is an access control right over oneself or the information related to oneself. The ability for a person to control aspects of their own personhood, property, and or personal information are related to this fundamental access and control right. The control or use account is actually highly applicable to the blockchain industry, and I'll circle back on this idea a little later. Now, of course, these are not all the accounts of privacy that one may come across. I've mentioned these are the most well-known or the most prevalent in the literature, certainly that I have read thus far. But what are the philosophical frames? Okay, so the standard account is that privacy is required for autonomy. Without concepts of privacy, it would be very difficult to remain an autonomous agent operating in the world. In a very close-knit world, a small community in a developing nation, for example, you might still remain an autonomous, self-determining agent whilst everybody knows your actions. But the reverse is very difficult to imagine. So can you imagine a society in which there is privacy, but no autonomy? If I'm able to stay in a room and nobody can determine my actions, past, present, or future, it would seem that I am afforded a level of autonomy. And that would seem to be logical. And either way you look at it, the relationship between privacy and autonomy is relatively clear. There is even the argument in literature that for true freedom, that for true autonomy, there is a requirement for privacy. And that's based on the idea that for one to operate according to one's own free will, a person must be free from observation. People must be able to operate in a private space. So for a second, imagine a truly transparent society where everybody knows everything about one another and everything is observable by everyone else. A person then may start to value conformity over individuality. Your ability to remain autonomous is now somehow affected. You can develop this idea further, as an author called Lucas Introna does, and he states that for privacy and accountability to have any meaning at all, one needs privacy. Privacy is the veil from which both transparency and accountability operate from. When you start to think about accountability, you might then to start thinking about justice. So the concern for individual privacy may actually be regarded as a concern for justice. That may manifest in concerns regarding equality. For example, if someone has information pertaining to another, one may gain an advantage over them. So ensuring that nobody can gain this advantage is a concern for equality of information. Through the protection of information, no one agent is able to use information asymmetry to leverage some advantage over another. Now, of course, there is the issue of the state and its relation to individuals. If we are to believe that justice is based on equal opportunity to all individuals, the state may need to gather information from individuals in order to ensure that there is equal distribution of justice. And that, of course, means surveillance. This may mean that the state has to impinge on individuals' privacy. Now, is this ethical? I don't necessarily have the answer to this. I may have a personal opinion, but my opinion is just that. It should also be said that political philosophy doesn't have the answer to this either. However, you might imagine, however hypothetical, a situation where the individual and the state have aligned motives. In this world, the individual may freely offer certain degrees of their information in order to ensure a more equal distributive justice. An individual having the control over what information is shared, when and for what purpose, is placing the responsibility of distributive justice in some way into the hands of the individual. More often than not, privacy is related to the individual, so the normative or moral base is related to something attributed to the self. Privacy is a right. It should be protected and it should only be taken away in abnormal circumstances. In reality, privacy often seems to determine what belongs to the individual and what exists outside of the individual. And that can be explained in a practical manner and in an existential manner. So the standard philosophical argument is that respect for privacy is necessary for human dignity to exist. The normative underpinning is that a human being needs some level of privacy to operate as a dignified individual, and as such it should be protected. The line of inquiry can continue. We can ask what the relationship is between privacy and selfhood. So selfhood and individualism are key aspects of the conversation. So, for example, in order to define our character with some level of integrity, we need to be able to operate in private spheres. The ability to be trusted as an individual requires some level of privacy to be afforded. Reductionists would say that concepts such as trust and integrity are dependent on privacy. Either way, some level of moral integrity for me as an individual is dependent on a notion of privacy. Secondly, in order to have varied human relationships, one must be able to individually decide what one shares with some and not with others. There must be some distinction. Our own spectrum of relationships, whether that be friends, colleagues, lovers, family, is often determined by relative levels of privacy and publicity. I know for certain that I don't share everything with my friends, colleagues, and university supervisors as I do with my girlfriend. There are varying shades of privacy. Defining levels of privacy and publicity allow me to individualize and distinguish difference between distinct personal relationships. I want to take a little diversion and talk briefly about some ethnographic studies. I want to illustrate what is called the cultural universality of privacy, and I want to discuss this as I recently watched a talk by Albert Wenger of Blockstack. Albert made the extremely misguided claim that privacy was a modern concept, and as such we should be careful about affording a future in which privacy is overtly protected. I want to dispel this notion by talking about some communities that have varying notions of privacy contained within their ancient cultures. The first is the Manaku Indian tribe who reside in central Brazil. This tribe was studied by two ethnographers in the 1970s. The Manaku have a culture of minimal privacy, minimal but not absent of. In the study, the ethnographers observed the community habituated themselves all in one village. 5 communal houses are located on the outside of an open central plaza. Straight open pathways join the central plaza to the houses. There are no doors, and it seems that there are no exclusion policies in any of the houses. There was no announcement when entering or exiting, and this seems a very public society. However, community members were free to leave the village alone for days at a time. There were strong norms against exposing others' misconduct. Telling on each other was frowned upon, and people did not ask embarrassing questions of one another, and lying was a regular practice. Notions of privacy were observed in their culture regarding autonomy, individualism, and free will, even though their communal environment seemed to contain very little privacy. In another study, ethnographers observed the pygmies of Zaire in the Congo. So, Turnbull in the 60s observed that new arrivals into camps or families meant doors and walls were physically moved in huts. One could keep track of arguments, jealousies, and conflicts as huts were moved around and rearranged to afford varying degrees of privacy and publicity between community members. Community members often built what were called spite fences between each other's houses during serious disagreements to create distance and a veil of supposed privacy, or at least less publicity, between houses. Some families would even move to entirely separate parts of the locale during disagreements, sometimes for months at a time. In this example, the pygmies used their communal environment as infrastructure to determine varying levels of privacy and publicity. Turnbull noticed that the pygmies oscillated between periods of togetherness and separateness, a cycle they followed year after year. So a highly communal society had mechanisms to regulate their levels of privacy, and crucially, they remained in control of these aspects themselves. So I've talked a lot about privacy, and you're probably sitting there thinking, what does all this have to do with cryptocurrency and blockchain? And it's a fair question. I'm going to keep the next section relatively short and relatively blunt. First, I think it's important to acknowledge that a vast amount of the technologies that are deployed within cryptocurrency and blockchain were developed by privacy advocates or with information privacy and security in mind. Public-private key encryption, hashing algorithms, RSA encryption schemes, blind signatures, confidential transactions, zero-knowledge proofs, use of pseudo-anonymous addressing schemes, dandelion relays, and so on, they all may be seen as privacy-enhancing technologies. Without doubt, blockchain technology is fundamentally a privacy-enhancing technology. But this is only the case if it's used in the correct manner. There's a level of social constructivism to all this. Remember that the origins of blockchain technology are found in the cypherpunk community. The cypherpunks valued privacy. They warned against state and corporate surveillance. They encouraged societal education on the dangers of publicity. They urged deployment of cryptographic tools to wrestle back control from the ever-increasing encroachment of our own personal and informational privacy by nefarious agents, large corporations, and the surveillance state. And that was in the 1990s. So have we as a community heeded this advice? We have built vast public ledgers, which are unprecedented data silos on open, permissionless systems recording every single information transaction. We have watched as exchanges submit and comply with strict, sometimes draconian anti-money laundering, know your customer and anti-terrorist financing regulations with almost no pushback from us as a community. We have created unregulated spaces for centralized agents like exchanges and wallet providers to gather and harvest huge swathes of valuable data with no line of recourse as to what they may or may not be doing with it. We have watched as chain analysis tools, techniques, and companies have emerged, offering pay and play services for data tracking and tracing. We continue to use centralized agents to store and manage our private and public keys. We continue to transact on traceable and trackable blockchain systems, completely oblivious to the vast open data mound that we are creating. And we watch as closed-wall permission systems are being integrated through a range of industries, knowing full well that information is being locked inside corporate vaults. It's like we have forgotten one of the primary reasons why all this technology exists in the first place. It was built by privacy advocates to leverage personal and informational privacy. It was built to help protect our autonomy, leverage our individuality, and more equally distribute justice. So, I want to ask now, are there any representatives here from any of the large exchanges? So from Coinbase, Bitstamp, even companies like Revolut. Okay. Are there any representatives from any of the chain analysis firms? Okay. Are there any representatives from Ripple, Stellar, Blockstack, EOS, Ethereum, Tron, or any of the decentralized systems and application platforms that have little heed for information or transactional privacy? Okay, so there's a few. I'm hoping that maybe there's more watching online. So hands up if you're from any of these companies or associated with any of these communities or systems. We have an expression in Ireland, and it roughly translates as pull your socks up. And it goes something like this: do me a favour and cop the fuck on. Thank you for listening.